The Hound of the Baskervilles. Chapter 4. Sir Henry Baskerville. The breakfast table was cleared promptly, and Holmes, still clad in his dressing gown, awaited the anticipated guests. Punctuality was a virtue they possessed, for the clock struck 10 precisely as Dr. Mortimer, followed by the young baronet, was ushered in. Sir Henry, a man of about 30, was a compact, sharp-eyed figure. His sturdy build, thick black eyebrows, and resolute face betrayed a life spent outdoors. Though his tweed suit bore the marks of the elements, his steady gaze and assured demeanor spoke of a gentleman. "This is Sir Henry Baskerville," Dr. Mortimer announced. "Indeed," said Sir Henry, his voice a touch gruff. "And the odd thing is, Mr. Holmes, had Dr. Mortimer not suggested this visit, I would have come myself. I understand you have a knack for unraveling mysteries, and I've encountered one this morning that requires a sharper mind than mine." "Pray, take a seat, Sir Henry," Holmes replied, his voice laced with an air of quiet anticipation. "Do I understand you to mean you've experienced something remarkable since arriving in London?" "Nothing of consequence, Mr. Holmes. A mere prank, most likely. It was this letter, if one can call it that, which arrived this morning." He laid an envelope on the table, and we all leaned forward. It was unremarkable. A plain grayish envelope. The address, Sir Henry Baskerville, Northumberland Hotel, was printed in crude characters. The postmark, Charing Cross, and the date of posting the preceding evening. "Who knew you were staying at the Northumberland Hotel?" Holmes inquired, his gaze fixed on our visitor. "No one could have known. We decided on it after I met Dr. Mortimer." "But surely Dr. Mortimer was already staying there?" "No, I was with a friend," the doctor replied. "There was no way anyone could have anticipated our destination." Holmes murmured. "Someone appears to be deeply invested in your movements." From the envelope he retrieved a folded sheet of foolscap paper. He opened it and spread it flat on the table. A single sentence, composed of pasted printed words, dominated the sheet. "As you value your life or your reason, keep away from the moor." Only the word moor was written in ink. "Now," Sir Henry said, a touch of exasperation in his voice, "perhaps you can tell me, Mr. Holmes, what in the world this means and who is so interested in my affairs." "What is your opinion, Dr. Mortimer?" Holmes asked, turning to the doctor. "Surely you don't believe there's anything supernatural about this?" "No, sir, but it could very well be from someone who is convinced the situation is supernatural." "What business?" asked Sir Henry sharply. "It seems to me that all you gentlemen know a great deal more than I do about my own affairs." "You shall share our knowledge before you leave this room, Sir Henry." "I promise you that," said Sherlock Holmes. "We will confine ourselves for the present, with your permission, to this very interesting document, which must have been put together and posted yesterday evening. Have you yesterday's Times, Watson?" "It is here, in the corner." "Might I trouble you for it? The inside page, please, with the leading articles." He glanced swiftly over it, running his eyes up and down the columns. "Capital article this on free trade. Permit me to give you an extract from it. You may be cajoled into imagining that your own special trade or your own industry will be encouraged by a protective tariff, but it stands to reason that such legislation must, in the long run, keep away wealth from the country, diminish the value of our imports, and lower the general conditions of life in this island." "What do you think of that, Watson?" cried Holmes in high glee, rubbing his hands together with satisfaction. "Don't you think that is an admirable sentiment?" Dr. Mortimer looked at Holmes with an air of professional interest, and Sir Henry Baskerville turned a pair of puzzled dark eyes upon me. "I don't know much about the tariff and things of that kind," said he, But it seems to me we've got a bit off the trail so far as that note is concerned. On the contrary, I think we are particularly hot upon the trail, Sir Henry. Watson here knows more about my methods than you do, but I fear that even he has not quite grasped the significance of this sentence. No, I confess that I see no connection. And yet, my dear Watson, there is so very close a connection that the one is extracted out of the other. You, your life, reason, value, keep away from the— Don't you see now whence these words have been taken? By thunder, you're right. Well, if that isn't smart, cried Sir Henry. If any possible doubt remained, it is settled by the fact that keep away and from the are cut out in one piece. Well now, so it is. Really, Mr. Holmes, this exceeds anything which I could have imagined, said Dr. Mortimer, gazing at my friend in amazement. I could understand anyone saying that the words were from a newspaper, but that you should name which, and add that it came from the leading article, is really one of the most remarkable things which I have ever known. How did you do it? I presume, Doctor, that you could tell the skull of a Negro from that of an Eskimo? Most certainly. But how? Because that is my special hobby. The differences are obvious. The supraorbital crest, the facial angle, the maxillary curve, But this is my special hobby, and the differences are equally obvious. There is as much difference to my eyes between the leaded bourgeois type of a Times article and the slovenly print of an evening halfpenny paper as there could be between your Negro and your Eskimo. The detection of types is one of the most elementary branches of knowledge to the special expert in crime, though I confess that once when I was very young, I confused the Leeds Mercury with the Western Morning News. But a Times leader is entirely distinctive, and these words could have been taken from nothing else. As it was done yesterday, the strong probability was that we should find the words in yesterday's issue. So far as I can follow you then, Mr. Holmes, said Sir Henry Baskerville, someone cut out this message with a scissors. Nail scissors, said Holmes. You can see that it was a very short-bladed scissors, since the cutter had to take 2 snips over keep away. That is so. Someone then cut out the message with a pair of short-bladed scissors, pasted it with paste. Gum, said Holmes, with gum onto the paper. But I want to know why the word more should have been written. Because he could not find it in print. The other words were all simple and might be found in any issue, but more would be less common. Why, of course, that would explain it. Have you read anything else in this message, Mr. Holmes? There are 1 or 2 indications, and yet the utmost pains have been taken to remove all clues. The address, you observe, is printed in rough characters, but the Times is a paper which is seldom found in any hands but those of the highly educated. We may take it, therefore, that the letter was composed by an educated man who wished to pose as an uneducated one, and his effort to conceal his own writing suggests that that writing might be known or come to be known by you. Again, you will observe that the words are not gummed on in an accurate line, but that some are much higher than others. Life, for example, is quite out of its proper place. That may point to carelessness, or it may point to agitation and hurry upon the part of the cutter. On the whole, I incline to the latter view, since the matter was evidently important, and it is unlikely that the composer of such a letter would be careless. If he were in a hurry, it opens up the interesting question why he should be in a hurry, since any letter posted up to early morning would reach Sir Henry before he would leave his hotel. Did the composer fear an interruption? And from whom? We are coming now rather into the region of guesswork, said Dr. Mortimer. Say, rather, into the region where we balance probabilities and choose the most likely. It is the scientific use of the imagination, but we have always some material basis on which to start our speculation. Now, you would call it a guess, no doubt, But I am almost certain that this address has been written in a hotel." "How in the world can you say that?" Sir Henry exclaimed, his voice laced with disbelief. "Examine it carefully, and you'll see that both the pen and the ink have given the writer trouble," Holmes responded, his voice calm and measured. The pen sputtered twice in a single word and ran dry 3 times in the short address, indicating very little ink in the bottle. Now, a private pen or ink bottle is rarely allowed to be in such a state, and the combination of the two is quite unusual. But you know the hotel ink and the hotel pen. It's rare to find anything else there. Yes, I have little doubt that if we examined the waste paper baskets of the hotels around Charing Cross until we found the remains of the mutilated Times leader, we could lay our hands on the person who sent this singular message. Halloa! Halloa! What's this?" He was meticulously examining the foolscap paper, holding it just an inch or two from his eyes. "Well?" Dr. Mortimer prompted, his curiosity piqued. "Nothing," Holmes said, tossing the paper down with a dismissive shrug. "It's a blank half-sheet of paper without even a watermark. I believe we've extracted all we can from this curious letter. Now, Sir Henry, has anything else of interest happened to you since your arrival in London?" "Why, no, Mr. Holmes, I don't think so." "Have you observed anyone following or watching you?" "It seems I've walked right into the thick of a dime novel," Sir Henry said with a chuckle, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Why in thunder should anyone follow or watch me?" "We're getting to that," Holmes replied, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "You have nothing else to report to us before we delve deeper into this matter?" "Well, it depends on what you consider worth reporting. I consider anything outside the ordinary routine of life worthy of reporting." Sir Henry smiled, a touch of amusement in his eyes. "I haven't quite grasped the intricacies of British life yet, having spent most of my time in the States and Canada, but I hope that losing one of your boots is not part of the ordinary routine over here." "You've lost one of your boots?" Holmes's eyebrows rose in surprise. "My dear sir," Dr. Mortimer interjected, "it's merely mislaid. You'll find it when you return to the hotel. Why bother Mr. Holmes with such trifles? Well, he asked me for anything out of the ordinary routine." "Precisely," Holmes agreed. "However foolish the incident may seem, you have lost one of your boots, you say?" "Well, mislaid it anyway. I placed both boots outside my door last night, and this morning there was only one. I couldn't make sense of the chap who cleans them. The worst part is, I only bought the pair last night in the Strand, and I've never even worn them." "If you've never worn them, why did you put them out to be cleaned?" "They were tan boots and had never been varnished. That's why I put them out." "Then I understand that upon your arrival in London yesterday, you went out immediately and bought a pair of boots?" "I did a fair amount of shopping. Dr. Mortimer here accompanied me. You see, if I'm to be squire down there, I must dress the part, and it appears I've become a bit careless out west. Among other things, I bought these brown boots, paid $6 for them, and had one stolen before I even wore them. It seems a peculiarly useless thing to steal," Sherlock Holmes remarked. "I confess that I share Dr. Mortimer's belief that the missing boot will be found soon enough." "Now, gentlemen," the baronet declared, with resolute determination, "I feel I've spoken enough about my limited knowledge. It's time you kept your promise and gave me a full account of what we're all aiming at." "Your request is entirely reasonable," Holmes acknowledged. "Dr. Mortimer, I believe you couldn't do better than to recount your story as you told it to us." Thus encouraged, our scientific friend extracted his papers from his pocket and presented the entire case as he had done the previous morning. Sir Henry Baskerville listened intently, occasionally uttering exclamations of surprise. "Well, it seems I've inherited quite a lot with a vengeance," he said when the lengthy narrative concluded. "Of course, I've heard tales of the Hound ever since I was a child. It's a family legend, although I never took it seriously before. But as for my uncle's death, well, it's all swirling around in my head, and I can't make sense of it yet. You don't seem entirely decided whether it's a case for the police or a clergyman. Precisely, Holmes confirmed with a wry smile. And now there's this matter of the letter to me at the hotel. I suppose that fits into the puzzle. It appears someone knows more than we do about what happens on the moor, Dr. Mortimer observed. And also, Holmes added, that someone is not entirely against you, since they warn you of danger. Or perhaps they wish to scare me away for their own purposes. Well, of course, that's possible too. I'm much obliged to you, Dr. Mortimer, for introducing me to a problem with so many interesting possibilities. But the practical point we must now decide, Sir Henry, is whether it's advisable for you to go to Baskerville Hall. Why shouldn't I go? There seems to be danger. Do you mean danger from this family fiend, or do you mean danger from human beings? Well, that's what we must find out. Whichever it is, my decision is made. There's no devil in hell, Mr. Holmes, and no man on earth can prevent me from going to the home of my own people. And you can consider that my final answer. His dark brows furrowed, and his face flushed a dusky red as he spoke. It was evident that the fiery temperament of the Baskervilles was not extinct in this, their last representative. Meanwhile, he continued, I've barely had time to process all you've told me. It's a lot for a man to understand and decide in one sitting. I'd like a quiet hour to myself to make up my mind. Now, look here, Mr. Holmes, it's 11:30, and I'm heading back to my hotel. Suppose you and your friend, Dr. Watson, come around and have lunch with us at 2. I'll be able to tell you more clearly then how this thing strikes me. Is that convenient for you, Watson? Holmes asked, turning to his companion. Perfectly, Watson replied. Then you can expect us. Shall I have a cab called? I'd prefer to walk. This affair has rather flustered me. I'll join you in a walk with pleasure, his companion offered. Then we'll meet again at 2. Au revoir and good morning. We heard the footsteps of our visitors descending the stairs and the resounding bang of the front door. In an instant, Holmes transformed from the languid dreamer to the man of action. Your hat and boots, Watson, quick. Not a moment to lose. He rushed into his room in his dressing gown and was back in a few seconds, now in a frock coat. We hurried together down the stairs and into the street. Dr. Mortimer and Baskerville were still visible about 200 yards ahead of us, heading in the direction of Oxford Street. Shall I run on and stop them? I asked, my eagerness to learn more outweighing any concern for decorum. Not for the world, my dear Watson, Holmes replied, his voice a low chuckle. I'm perfectly content with your company if you'll tolerate mine. Our friends are wise, for it's certainly a fine morning for a walk. He quickened his pace until we had cut the distance between us in half. Then, still keeping 100 yards behind, we followed into Oxford Street and down Regent Street. Our friends paused and stared into a shop window, upon which Holmes did the same. An instant later, he uttered a little cry of satisfaction, and following the direction of his eager eyes, I saw that a hansom cab with a man inside, which had halted on the other side of the street, was now moving slowly onward again. There's our man, Watson. Come along. We'll have a good look at him, if we can do no more. Holmes's voice crackled with urgency, his eyes fixed on the hansom cab disappearing down Regent Street. Instantly, I was aware of a bushy black beard and a pair of piercing eyes turned upon us through the side window of the cab. With a sudden, swift movement, the trapdoor at the top flew open. A sharp command was shouted to the driver, and the cab sped off madly down Regent Street. Holmes looked around frantically for another cab, but none were available. He dashed into the throng of traffic in a desperate pursuit, but the head start was too great, and the cab was already out of sight. There now! Holmes exclaimed bitterly. emerging panting and white with frustration from the tide of vehicles. Was ever such bad luck and such poor management too? Watson, Watson, if you are an honest man, you will record this as well and set it against my successes." "Who was the man?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. "I have no idea." "A spy?" "Well, it was evident from what we've heard that Baskerville has been closely shadowed by someone since he arrived in town. How else could they have known so quickly that he chose the Northumberland Hotel? If they followed him the first day, I reasoned that they would follow him the second. You may have noticed that I twice strolled over to the window while Dr. Mortimer was reading his legend." "Yes, I remember. I was looking out for loiterers in the street, but I saw none. We're dealing with a clever man, Watson. This matter cuts deep, and although I haven't definitively decided whether it's a benevolent or malevolent force in contact with us, I'm constantly aware of power and intent. When our friends left, I immediately followed them in hopes of identifying their invisible attendant. He was so cunning that he hadn't trusted himself on foot, but had taken a cab so he could loiter behind or dash past them and escape their notice. His method had the added advantage that, if they were to take a cab, he was ready to follow them. However, it had one obvious disadvantage. It puts him in the power of the cabman." "Exactly. What a pity we didn't get the number. My dear Watson, clumsy as I have been, you surely don't seriously believe I neglected to get the number? No, 2704 is our man, but that's no use to us for the moment. I can't see how you could have done more. On observing the cab, I should have instantly turned and walked in the opposite direction. Then, at my leisure, I would have hired a second cab and followed the first at a respectful distance, or, better yet, driven to the Northumberland Hotel and waited there. When our unknown had followed Baskerville home, we would have had the opportunity to play his own game against him and see where he made for. As it is, by an indiscreet eagerness, which was taken advantage of with extraordinary quickness and energy by our opponent, we have betrayed ourselves and lost our man." We had been sauntering slowly down Regent Street during this conversation, and Dr. Mortimer, with his companion, had long disappeared in front of us. "There's no point in following them," Holmes said. "The shadow has departed and won't return. We must see what other cards we have in our hands and play them decisively." "Could you swear to that man's face inside the cab?" "I could swear only to the beard." "And so could I, which leads me to believe it was probably false. A clever man on such a delicate errand has no use for a beard except to conceal his features. Come in here, Watson." He turned into one of the district messenger offices, where he was warmly greeted by the manager. "Ah, Wilson, I see you haven't forgotten the little case in which I had the good fortune to help you." "No, sir, indeed I have not. You saved my good name and perhaps my life." "My dear fellow, you exaggerate. I do recall, Wilson, that you had a boy named Cartwright among your lads, who showed some ability during the investigation." "Yes, sir. He's still with us." "Could you ring him up?" "Thank you. And I'd be grateful for change of this £5 note." A boy of 14 with a bright, keen face had obeyed the manager's summons. He stood now, gazing with great reverence at the famous detective. "Let me have the hotel directory," Holmes said. "Thank you. Now, Cartwright, there are the names of 23 hotels here, all in the immediate neighborhood of Charing Cross. Do you see?" "Yes, sir." "You will visit each of these in turn." "Yes, sir." "You will begin in each case by giving the outside porter 1 shilling. Here are 23 shillings." "Yes, sir." "You will tell him that you want to see the waste paper from yesterday. You will say that an important telegram has miscarried, and that you are looking for it. You understand?" "Yes, sir. But what you are really looking for is the center page of the Times with some holes cut in it with scissors. Here is a copy of the Times. It's this page. You could easily recognize it, couldn't you?" "Yes, sir." "In each case, the outside porter will send for the hall porter, to whom you will also give 1 shilling. Here are 23 shillings. You will then learn in possibly 20 cases out of the 23 that the waste from the day before has been burned or removed. In the 3 other cases, you will be shown a heap of paper, and you will look for this page of the Times among it. The odds are enormously against your finding it. There are 10 shillings over in case of emergencies. Let me have a report by wire at Baker Street before evening. And now, Watson, it only remains for us to find out by wire the identity of the cabman, number 2704. And then we will drop into one of the Bond Street picture galleries and fill in the time until we are due at the hotel. The end. If you like the story, hit that like button and subscribe for more videos. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Was there anything that surprised you? Who's your favorite character in the story? I can't wait to hear your thoughts.